Is it possible for 5-MeO-DMT to give you an experience so powerful that it cures your fear of death? Did this experience actually cause lasting change? Or does the memory just fade away over time? Let's talk about it. It's actually been a while since I've made a disclaimer, but I think that with a tool as potent as Bufo or 5-MeO-DMT, whatever you want to call it, I think this requires one, because even though I would consider it one of the most profound experiences that I've had personally, I also think that it's one of the more dangerous drugs on this planet. Because when things go wrong with this particular substance, yeah, things can get real dark real quick. And I've personally received many emails from people sharing their personal experiences who they go into this, 5-MeO, enlightenment, one with God, whatever, and then they come out of it with psychosis basically and lose grip of reality, and maybe they just didn't have the right scaffolding at the time, or just they didn't have the right foundation. So then when they opened up Pandora's box and all boundaries got dissolved, and then they come back, they're left very ungrounded and losing the plot in a sense. So I just want to make it very clear that this is not something that I would recommend to anybody. I know that some people say that psychedelics don't make you go crazy, that's a myth, but I would beg to differ. It just depends who you are, what you take, how much you take, and there's, certain setting, there's context is everything. So, now that we got that ugly disclaimer out of the way, I wanted to reflect on my Bufo experience, which I had almost 3 years ago now, and I made a documentary on my experience. I'll leave a link in the description below. If you haven't seen it, check it out. A lot of people seem to enjoy it, and still to this day, this is like, again, almost 3 years later, and I would still consider it, at least experientially and intense-wise, it was the most profound experience of my life. For a very long time throughout my life, I had this fear of death, and I guess all humans do to a certain extent, but it really got to me for a little while there, where I went through this period of an existential crisis, and I thought I kind of healed through most of that, but I still had some residue of that fear of death, where sometimes those existential waves of dread would just wash over me every now and again, and I'd kind of get overwhelmed with the whole concept. And I think after this experience, because it gave me that, or at least what I perceived to be a direct experience of unifying with the Creator, Source, God, it allowed me to let that go and realize that everything's going to be okay. And really after death, you're going back to where you came from, in a sense, and going to that next level. It's like a video game, I suppose. Go into it without building a proper foundation, you can have this kind of messiah complex of thinking you're God. It happens all the time. Go search on YouTube right now. In reality, there's a lot more nuance to it, and when you're talking about spiritual realities, it's so much more complex than what your human mind can handle. And I think that as human beings, we want to understand our experiences and our place in the universe. And to a certain degree, we can, right? Through human wisdom and what we can observe and using the scientific method and etc., etc. But this universe is so vast, so complicated, and has so many layers to it that there's always more pieces to the puzzle. And so I don't want to claim that, yes, I understand life, I have the conclusion, I have the ultimate answer, and all you have to do is smoke the toad and you'll get there. So 3 years later, am I still not afraid of death? Like, truly? Not even one wave every now and again where I kind of get that, oh crap, I'm gonna die one day, oh shit. I mean, I have my philosophies and beliefs and how I understand reality, and then using logic and reason of where things could go, but that's not what this video is about. It's really, is the fear there? And fear is an emotional thing. Sometimes it's not necessarily rational. It can be based in a rational thought, but fear is a primal emotion, and I don't know what the Bufo did to me. Maybe it was a spiritual or emotional surgery in a sense that kind of removed that tumor. I don't know, but I haven't had that feeling of being genuinely scared of the death point. However, and this is a huge caveat, I'm still afraid of dying, right? Of getting older, of my body breaking down, of getting a messed up illness where I can't even enjoy my life anymore, or especially loved ones dying. When I say I'm afraid of this doesn't mean that it's something that I think about all the time, but does it genuinely upset me when those waves hit? Yeah, of course, right? That's just being a human being. Sorrow and pain and tragedy is inevitable. I think it's really about being at peace with not being at peace with that, in a sense. Or not allowing those cycles to overtake you for too long. You can't delay winter forever, you know. Eventually it's going to come, and when it does, okay, fine. Maybe going outside and climbing a mountain might not be as convenient or as fun as doing it in the summer, but there are all these other things that you can do during that time, like staying home, make a fire, cuddle up with your loved ones, catch up on some movies, read, do some self-introspection. Every season has its, I guess, pros and cons. And so even now, when I say that I've gotten over my fear of death, I'm only speaking from this stage of my life. I don't know what's going to happen 5 years time from now, 10 years, 15, 20, 25, 30. Maybe something will happen that will genuinely struck that fear of God in my heart again. I don't know. But for now, it's something that I thankfully don't have to deal with. And so while it can be very useful overcoming that stranglehold that death has on our necks, you equally need to have the love of life within it. And I know that even fear has this negative connotation, especially in certain New Age circles, but it doesn't have to be. Fear can be incredibly powerful. We don't know how to transform fear into something that works towards our benefit. And that goes for any negative or positive emotion, really. I think one of the biggest spiritual traps there is trying to detach ourselves from our humanness, which includes a lot of the, these negative emotions that we may have, like sadness, sorrow, fear. And so while in certain contexts, having a direct, powerful, mystical experience could be the solution for that moment at that stage of your life, sometimes the more effective thing to do is actually just to read more books and to meditate and purposely stay away from this spiritual stuff, because I've realized, and this is not even with psychedelics, this is spiritual practices in general, including every single religion, right? Whether you're talking about Buddhism or Christianity or Taoism or Judaism, Orthodoxy, whatever. Any one of these paths can be incredibly dangerous if you navigate those spiritual waters without building your foundation and be grounded on who you are as a human. It's like in a video game, instead of leveling up your character, learning the game mechanics and gradually progressing throughout the game so by the time you burst that final boss, you're ready. But then what you realize is that because you skipped all those levels, you didn't get weapon A, B, and C, you didn't get this tool, you didn't learn this move, you didn't level up your character enough, so by the time you reach the last level, you get destroyed. Absolutely. And some people do when they go into these spiritual waters. And this is why I emphasize being grounded so much, and why I've even put on my banner, grounded spirituality, because that's not the end goal. And I think it just depends on who I'm talking to. I think on this channel I talk to a lot of spiritually minded people wanting to go that direction, but I think our shadow, and this includes myself, is that we want to go and do the spiritual stuff without doing the kind of concrete reality stuff, which is actually what makes these spiritual realities even possible to begin with. It's not a one-way road, it's a feedback loop, right? We're raising earth and lowering heaven, bringing heaven onto earth, bringing immaterial principalities and manifesting them in physical, corporal reality. Sometimes the best thing to do is just the simple stuff. And I myself have fallen many times into delusion because I got, I guess, overwhelmed or attached to the emotional state that I was in, and I kind of confused my direct experience with the actual truth of the matter, but that's clearly not the case, at least not all the time. Most of you guys know that I've had a very polarizing journey with psychedelics, but when it comes to Bufo, still, it's my most positive trip I've had to date. I don't even have anything negative to say about it, which is why I needed to do this huge disclaimer and really talk about how things can go wrong. You can't just judge my experience and think that that's just the reality of it for most people, because it's not. I feel like as I continue along my spiritual journey, I had to kind of, you never really pause your spiritual journey, because someone in the comment section, one of my other videos, did say that you're never really off your spiritual path. And in a sense that's true, because every physical action that you do is interwoven with spiritual realities, with principalities, right? And so I guess it's more of an emphasis of what you're focusing on. And I think for a few years, which is actually quite ironic, because with the 5-MeO DMT trip, it actually made me more grounded afterwards. I was more focused on what's in front of me, on planet Earth, on what being human is, physical reality. But like we were talking about before, different seasons come at different times, and there are going to be times which I feel like might just begin to move into is more the kind of spiritual, esoteric, mystical side of things. But then if I go too far into that world and I become too ungrounded, a bit wishy-washy, then hopefully I'll realize this myself in the moment to step back a little bit. Or maybe I'll have a good friend who'll call me out in the moment. Yeah, Tommy, being a bit of a spiritual douchebag right now, you're not making any sense. And of course the spiritual ego will be like, yeah, that's because you don't understand. You haven't had it's always project. I'm right because of my experience. Would I do 5-MeO again? I think with psychedelics, the last few years, it's something that I haven't really planned too far ahead of. It's something that has to really call me in the moment, and I have to make sure that I'm in a really good place in life. Because I know in the past I've used psychedelics for healing, especially with like depression, a lot of these mental issues, and that can help, and it can also make things worse. And so it's a gamble that way. And because I've seen a lot of dark corners of the spiritual realm, I'm much more aware of how south things can go very quickly. It's all about the scaffolding, your foundation, your context, your set and setting, a lot of the stuff that people know, but I feel like we don't get reminded enough, because clearly most people are still making the exact same mistakes. And I'm sure I'm going to make the same mistakes, because that's the thing, I'm still a human being. Right? I have impulses and irrational thoughts just like anyone else. That's why we need to help each other on this journey, because we're in it together. Which is one of the lessons that I took from my Bufo experience, which is that, man, this is the most important thing in the world, is where you are right now, what's in front of you. That's why it's important to count your blessings and be grateful for your fellow man and your family and friends, and even having this organic matter where we got fingers and we can interact with the world and pick things up, and we can turn pages and read and interpret symbols and recognize patterns and create and write and be so in tune with our primal animalistic instincts, and at the very same time clearly be connected to something a lot more divine. And at least in certain experiences we have the feeling of transcending time and space and being able to use logic and reason. And it's like, mate, nothing gets more psychedelic than the human experience. For real. It's just that most people are blind to it, and they get, I guess, used to what's in front of them, where they start chasing these more psychedelic fractal, and they'll be like, whoa, that's so profound. I'm pretty sure I was enlightened in that moment. Pride can easily pervert and twist something that's very beautiful. I mean, look at religion. Between now and, let's say, myself 3-4 years ago, when I was in a lot more of in spiritual turmoil, I suppose, and just kind of being overwhelmed with all these existential questions, just try not to think about it too much. Don't do it if it brings you all this sorrow and making you overwhelmed and anxious and all these kind of things. It should be fun, because there was a time where when I'd go too deep into theology or existential philosophy, and it would just make me more anxious, right? And it would just overwhelm things more and expand that boundary between known and unknown, and just getting closer and closer into the abyss. But now when I read that stuff, I have nothing but pure joy and fun. I haven't for many years gone into like this existential rut because either reality was too overwhelming or I was just too much in conflict with my mind. And a lot of that really comes down to transcending polarity and this either or mentality. And it can take a long time to truly reconcile a lot of these life paradoxes. But when you do, it's actually very freeing.
The half-wise, recognizing the comparative unreality of the universe, imagine that they may defy its laws. Such are vain and presumptuous fools, and they are broken against the rocks and torn asunder by the elements by reason of their folly. The truly wise, knowing the nature of the universe, use law against law, the higher against the lower. Mastery consists not in abnormal dreams, visions, and fantastical imaging or living, but in using the higher forces against the lower, escaping the pains of the lower planes by vibrating on the higher. Transmutation, not presumptuous denial, is the weapon of the master.
Since I was a kid, I was always fascinated with the concept of death. And just my curious mind was always like, but what happens? What's gonna happen? Like, I know people say this, and this, like this religious text says this hippie has a psychedelic trip, and he says that his experience says this, and this guy says this, and everyone's trying to figure this thing out. And so am I. But I think now I've learned not to just claim stuff, unless I have logic and reason to back it up, and not just an experience. Terence McKenna had a story similar to basically seeing like all these miracles of life happen. Like he'd go into the forest and like all these birds would go on his arm, and then as soon as he'd tell someone like, hey, come, check this out. Oh, but nothing would happen. And it'd be like, oh, but it just happened. I'm not crazy. Sure, you're not, right? And maybe it's a similar thing with death. Sometimes the true magic and miracles in life happens when you can't actually prove it to anyone. But I don't think that's the point. You know, as soon as you try to prove it to someone, it takes away the magic of it, in a sense. And maybe that's why death works the way it does, is that once you go, you can't... I know that some people say that they can communicate with the dead, but again, that's all... There's no 100% proof for that, because it's still coming from just a claim from someone's experiences. And many times they don't ever consider that they're being deluded. I'm not saying they are or they're not. I'm saying I don't know. And that there is no 100% proof that you can actually communicate with the dead. Maybe it's actually impossible. Maybe that's the point. And that's once you die, you can't tell everybody about it. Because it's like you're going to ruin the big surprise. It was actually a very special experience, which I'm very grateful for. And there's certain aspects of it which I'll share in the public, but then there's other stuff that I'm like, nah, I'm going to keep it to myself. Because there's been so many times in life where I share something and it takes away that power. There's a lot of mysteries out there and secrets, and there's so much more to discover, you know. I think as humans we try to rush to the end too much. We just want to know, yeah, but what happens at the end? Maybe the answer is a lot more simple than that, and it's to enjoy and be grateful for every moment. Love your brothers and sisters, create a family, raise your kids right, teach them to do the right thing, learn to be virtuous, cultivate that compassion, wisdom, strength, courage. Like still to this day I'm fascinated about spirituality and mysticism and studying all these different religions and going deep into theology. Dude, this is one of my biggest passions in life. I love it. You know, because I'm a human, I can still fall into pride. I have to constantly remind myself not to take it too seriously. At least not in this stage of my life. Maybe there's a point in your life where you've just basically mastered all areas of your life, and then you're ready to go to the next level. But I'm not there yet. And so right now I'm not going to use any logical reason or try to explain why I think this, but I'll just give you my straight up intuition about death and how I feel about it right now. And I think it's going to be a beautiful thing, man. Really. I still think that life is the purpose of it all, but I think that death isn't going to be as scary as most people think it is. I feel anyway, I'm not really thinking here, I feel as though death is going to be a coming home in a way, right? And going back to source and to the creator that made this whole thing. And hopefully is when everything will be explained. I hope that it's not like a reincarnation sort of thing where you're just in an infinite loop and you're always going to come back in a different body. I like the idea of after death, you go to some sort of an afterlife place where you can at least have an opportunity to say hello to all your family and friends and all the people that have missed you and all these kind of things. That would be beautiful. Now, whether that's the case or not, I don't know. There's no point really stressing over it because I don't have any control, because reality is the way it is. So if that's not the way it is, then it's not the way it is, and I'll have to just take it as it comes, I suppose. But that's just a hope of mine, really. But in my heart, I'm 100% certain within myself that death isn't the end, man. No way. I genuinely think that it's going to be a reconciliation of moments where everything is going to make sense. Or we die and we just rot in the ground and that's it. But what are your thoughts? Have you had a 5-MeO DMT trip? Was it beneficial to your life? Did it hinder your spiritual growth? Have you heard any horror stories or any positive stories? Like, what are your thoughts about it? And what do you think about death? I think it's in the Kabbalion. It's like, yeah, gaze up at the stars, but watch where you're walking. Otherwise you'll trip over. And with that note, I'll end it at that. Let us know what you think. If you enjoyed this video, share it around, give it a like, comment down below. If you want to support our work, and so we can continue making documentaries, exploring different cultures, feel free to check out patreon.com/yourmatetom and become a monthly supporter. Truly appreciate it. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Much love. Peace.